Taking a break from my usual format of alternate cinema, for this episode I'm expanding into alternate video gaming. Games that explore or are inspired by the dark and macabre. Being the first generation of consoles to fully explore 3D graphics, was also able to explore new experiences in atmospheric gameplay. Despite there being several notable video games to explore themes of horror, Generation 5 is considered the progenitor of horror gaming as an established niche. Even though developing from relatively no experience in the theme, we were graced with many outstanding titles, several of which would go on to become global phenomena, some even transcending into some of the most beloved multimedia franchises across the world, and today we'll be looking at the very best. So join me as I count down the top 10 Generation 5 video games. For this list, I'll be looking at the very best horror games released on the PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64. Joining me this week, please welcome Mr. Johnny Deadly.
Hey everybody, Johnny Deadly from the Gorecast here. Very happy to be back on Demented Pictures Top Tens again. I've been a big fan of the horror genre since I was a little kid, and once horror started to creep into the world of video games, I found it truly intoxicating to be fully immersed in these horror-like scenarios and get to play my own character or get to play out the whole scene of a horror movie or that kind of vibe in video games. And the horror genre beginnings could not be anywhere more prevalent than on the Generation 5 consoles. So today, we will only be talking about one game per franchise. There won't be any re-releases that have been brought out from previous things onto the Generation 5 consoles, so don't expect to see Doom or Alone in the Dark or anything like that showing up on the list today. And other than that, let's begin.
Number 10. Considered by some to be the goriest game ever made, Phantasmagoria would stand among its peers as the only extreme full-motion video game of its kind. Originally releasing on Windows and MS-DOS, would later be ported to the Sega Saturn. The game would become almost legendary for its over-the-top gore and insane death scenes. The basic gameplay is that of a simple point-and-click adventure, following the story of author Adrian Delaney, who inherits a colossal mansion, infested with supernatural specters with a maniacal and savage thirst for disembowelment, which give to the now iconic cutscenes. Despite its lackluster gameplay, what makes Phantasmagoria worthy of the number 10 spot is its unforgettable experience in shock horror, utilizing real actors and practical effects to create one of the first experiences in extreme gore media.
Phantasmagoria isn't just one of the first extreme horror gore experiences, it's still one of the most brutal by even today's standards in my opinion. It's one of the ones on the list that Mike had brought up that I hadn't actually played until I saw what was on the list, and having played it over the week, some of those kills are absolutely insane, especially for the year that it came out. The fact that it's full motion video and you're seeing it happen to actual people instead of just computer generated characters makes it even that little bit more brutal. And some of the topics that they bring up in the actual storyline, especially with the development of the main protagonist's girlfriend or boyfriend or husband, I can't remember which one it is, but his transcendence into crazy evil motherfucker is on par.
Number 9. Originally making headway in the arcades before being ported to the Sega Saturn, comes Sega's The House of the Dead. Taking the popular style of Virtua Cop and Time Crisis, the game plunges you into an intense shootout with a host of zombies and nightmare creatures. Boasting an eccentric B-movie presentation, complete with appalling voice acting, these aesthetics would ultimately add to the overall entertainment value. Although only a short game lasting an average of 30 minutes over 4 stages, the story sees the player take down the mansion of mad scientist Curian in a quest to save the damsel Sophie, spawning several sequels and the eccentric spin-off game The Typing of the Dead. The House of the Dead packs an intense and highly entertaining experience in zombie blasting action and is recognized as one of the greatest action shooters of the 1990s.
House of the Dead was one of those games when it was in the arcades. I lost a whole bunch of my pocket money to it over the years. I remember they used to have these black curtains around it in the arcades over here so that younger kids, i.e. me at the time, weren't able to see what was going on in relation to the zombie madness behind the curtain. Of course, we used to get in there, get a game or two, but then finally it came to the Sega Saturn where you were able to have the whole arcade experience at home because there was the light guns, which was revolutionary at the time, bringing the arcade from arcade to your living room, and on top of that, bringing zombies from the arcade to blow up in some gory, effects-laden fashions all over your living room as well. I would say House of the Dead is probably one of the best games of that genre from the 90s.
Number 8. Following the boom of popularity of dinosaurs in the 1990s, one of the greatest responses was Capcom's second installment of the short-lived survival horror franchise, Dino Crisis. Released by the powerhouse production company Capcom in 2000, and set in the futuristic year of 2010, the game continues the story of Regina from the original game, transported back in time to survive a giant military base infested with carnivorous dinosaurs. Adapting the gameplay from the previous installment to suit a more action-based experience, mixing up the format to include new characters and an insistence of destroying everything. Although sadly lacking the fear factor of its predecessor, the sequel would prove to be the superior game, and despite sharing many similarities with other games of the genre, Dino Crisis 2 presented enough proficiency, solid gameplay, and intense action to be recognized as one of the greatest on the platform.
Right, I have to say off the bat, Dino Crisis 2, I literally only played that over the weekend because this was on the list. I had no interest after playing Dino Crisis 1. I had found that so boring and just a lackluster, dinosaur-laden version of Resident Evil 1. This, on the other hand, now that I've finally got to give it a go and get over the hump, this is a whole lot of fun, which is the complete opposite of what the normal one was, where you literally just get ammo and go murdering a whole load of freaking psycho dinosaurs that are running around the place. Whole different beast of a game compared to what the first one was, and I think it's for the better.
Number 7. Releasing at the end of the Sega Saturn's lifespan, Deep Fear would sadly become an obscure video game, but also remembered as one of the greatest for the system. Taking place on a sunken oceanic naval base, after coming into contact with an alien virus, the crew of the facility undergo monstrous mutations. Again sharing many parallels with other survival horror games of the time, what makes the title stand out among its peers is the unyielding tension of an ever-depleting air supply, creating an unnerving mechanic of constantly fighting not only an infestation of creatures, but also the ability to breathe. Although often remembered for its appalling voice acting, Deep Fear delivers a familiar yet individual experience that may be the most underappreciated hidden-gen horror game of them all.
God damn it, Sega Saturn, I gotta give you credit where credit is due. Deep Fear, I know it's, look, we'll call a spade a spade. It is a Resident Evil clone, but when you're going to clone something, at least do it a little bit different. And Deep Fear brought in so many really cool little mechanics in there that weren't seen in any of the other games. Like, instead of having to go and just find cards and things in lockers, they had actual people there for you to interact with, and they'd have a higher level of clearance for you to be able to go get better weapons or things like that. The whole undersea setting is really, really interesting. The monsters looked really good. The voice acting was terrible. Admittedly, I can't deny that whatsoever. But you did a Resident Evil game, and you did it different, and you did it your own way. And by God, I really enjoyed it. And I totally agree, this is an underrated game that a lot of people, if you do get the chance, should go back and play.
Number 6. Following the colossal success of Final Fantasy VII, Square's following project Parasite Eve would bring the horror genre into the action RPG format. Serving as a sequel to the book of the same name, the story follows Aya, a detective who witnesses the mutation and evolution of Eve, a being with the ability to force spontaneous combustion upon humans and control the DNA of all living beings. Set in Manhattan, your mission is to prevent the birth of a new form of supreme being, all the while having to survive an onslaught of genetically manipulated creatures. Even managing to create some impressively unsettling moments. What impressed them most was the game's intricate lore and outstanding cinematic presentation, even spawning its own cinematic adaptation and inspiring the Bring Me the Horizon song of the same name. Parasite Eve is a franchise that many horror gaming fans are eager to see revived.
I was always a big fan of Parasite Eve when it came out on the PS1 from day one, because I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy VII and those turn-based JRPG style games, and this had the JRPG style look, but it also had the horror elements of Resident Evil 1 and the survival horror elements of Resident Evil 1, but yet also kind of had the turn-based combat system of those JRPGs that I spoke of before. It was a very interesting combination of game styles all merged into one, with a really good story, really good FMVs, and some bloody gross monsters, and a flaming opera scene that can't be beaten.
Number 5. Although being a movie licensed game, Alien Trilogy is an overlooked contender for one of the greatest. Only loosely following the narrative of the movies, you take control of Ellen Ripley, now as a colonial marine on a first-person mission to eradicate the xenomorph species from a derelict prison facility. Benefiting from the limitations of the generation's processors, allowing for only a short visual field, only intensifies the ability to be preyed upon, which is also further enhanced by the outstanding sound design. Utilizing the various genus of aliens from facehuggers to multiple queens, it would also be the first ever game to utilize motion capture to animate NPCs. Also featuring dialogue lifted directly from the pictures, further immersing the player into the Alien universe. Despite its limitations and aged appearance, Alien Trilogy still delivers an intense and atmospheric experience to which many claim is the best video game created from the Alien franchise to date.
I'm going to have to disagree with you, dude, on several points on this. Number one, I have to say, to date, the best Alien game in relation to the franchise is Alien Isolation. Hands down, it's the most terrifying Alien-related experience you're ever going to have in your life. I enjoy my first-person shooters. If anyone watches my Twitch, I'm always on first-person shooters. I had issues with this even back in the day. It was very clunky. I found the alien maneuvering around the way they did it in a zigzaggy pattern to be just very annoying, especially considering how it was very hard to aim with the controls the way it was laid out back then. The only thing that ever brought me back to this on repeated occasions is I bloody love Aliens as a game, and it was just nice to be able to run around with a gun in that general world.
Number 4. Set 1500 years after the previous installment, Legacy of Kain: Soul Reaver tells the story of Raziel, a fallen evolution of the vampire who is revived by an elder god to seek vengeance upon his own brethren, before ultimately confronting Kain, the monster responsible for his demise. Exploring the post-apocalyptic fictional world of Nosgoth, the most intuitive mechanic of the game would be the ability to shift between realities, phasing between the physical and spectral realms to manipulate and traverse the layout of the world, with one of the most standout features being the relatively stunning aesthetics and the grotesque and cerebral boss battles. Despite suffering a lackluster resolution, which would eventually be concluded in the sequel, the journey of the Soul Reaver remains a beloved entry of horror gaming. With the franchise seemingly abandoned since 2003, many gamers still hope to return to Nosgoth to recapture this truly unique vampire lore.
I'll tell you something for nothing. I'm one of those people that wants to go back to Nosgoth. Legacy of Kain: Soul Reaver and Legacy of Kain in general is my jam. I loved Legacy of Kain itself. With the top-down version when that came out, I was such a big fan. I was only playing that a couple of weeks ago myself. I love it. I love that game. And then when I heard there was a sequel coming, and when it was gone 3D and it was gone action-adventure style, and you got all the vampire powers and you're able to go fight all the different styles of vampires, and your man evolved as the game was going on with different abilities and things like that, it was a truly unique vampire-related gaming experience, and I loved every second of it.
Number 3. From the well-established franchise Castlevania comes the 10th installment, Symphony of the Night. The first game to feature Alucard as the main protagonist and popularized the non-linear style of narrative. Steeped in European Gothic aesthetics, the story sees the return of Dracula's castle and also of Richter Belmont, the previous hero from Rondo of Blood. Setting forth to destroy the castle and handicapped by death himself, your mission is to navigate Alucard through the labyrinthine castle and help restore his abilities to take down the monstrous re-envisioning of Dracula. Defying convention and remaining in a two-dimensional perspective caused some to believe that the lack of generational adaptation to be behind the times, but for those who played the game, saw it as a mastery of the genre. Although opening to rave reviews, Symphony of the Night suffered poor sales, but eventually became a word-of-mouth sensation, which over time is now recognized by many as the greatest entry in the entire Castlevania franchise.
I have to wholeheartedly agree. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is the best in the franchise, and I'm a big fan of the franchise in general, wearing my Castlevania t-shirt right now, represent. The reason this game was so good was because it was a literal love letter from the production team to the franchise in general. They brought the older characters back, even tying in the whole Alucard story, bringing in the Richter versus Dracula fight that was literally at the end of, I think it was Rondo of Blood if memory serves me correctly, tying both games in together perfectly, bringing back some of the old monsters that have shown up from the games, making some new monsters. They were really inventive in the way that they revolutionised the game by bringing in the Japanese role-playing game elements into it while still keeping the platforming hack and slash vibe going. And instead of having it completely linear, it was an absolute exploration around this breathtaking castle with lovely scenery, and the whole inventiveness of just flipping the castle upside down and giving you a 200% game to play. Absolutely brilliant. I love Castlevania so much.
Number 2. Possibly the most well-known horror gaming franchise of them all, Resident Evil 2 is an unquestionable classic. Taking everything learned from the first installment and creating what many believe to be the greatest game of the series. Splitting the narrative into 2 campaigns and furthering the pulp cinema format. Taking control of Claire Redfield and Leon Kennedy. The game throws you into the center of Raccoon City to take down the creator of the G-Virus, William Birkin, an ever-evolving mutation. Also introducing Mr. X, who would also become an iconic villain. The game fully established the franchise, which would evolve into possibly the most successful horror franchise of all time. Expanding into comic books, anime, and a hugely successful movie series. Also receiving an outstanding remake in 2019, Resident Evil 2 just may be the greatest horror action game of them all.
I'm a big fan of the Resident Evil games in general, but when it came to Generation 5, Resident Evil 2, in my opinion, has to be where it's at. It keeps all of the fear and tension and claustrophobia that you do get from Resident Evil 1, but brings you into Raccoon City where you get to go around and explore a little bit more. You have a lot more zombies to run into. There's a lot more weapons that you're able to get your hands on, so defense and everything is a little bit better. The storyline is brilliant. The voice acting has been kicked up a whole notch, and I really just like Leon as a character in general.
Before we get to number 1, if you enjoyed Demented Top Tens, show your appreciation by hitting the thumbs up button and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel. Also, have your say in future Top 10s and follow Demented Pictures on Facebook, or consider supporting the show on Patreon. Links in the description box below. And a huge shout out to Canday Jones as my top tier patron. Number 1. One of the most difficult to decide number 1s of the series goes to 1999's Silent Hill, taking the title simply for its unparalleled experience in horror. Taking control of Harry Mason, who finds himself stranded within the ghost town of Silent Hill, searching for his lost daughter Cheryl, while having to overcome ever-changing realities that are falling into a nightmarish dimension, infested with a host of demented and twisted creatures, affecting the player on a psychological level that had never before been witnessed in gaming. As you progress through the town, you uncover more and more genuinely unsettling situations, all while being absorbed into some of the most darkly beautiful aesthetics of its time. Another main contribution is the outstanding original music, created by acclaimed composer Akira Yamaoka, enhancing the raw cerebral immersion into the narrative. Featuring phenomenal sound design, an eerie artistic aesthetic, and a highly polished experience in psychological horror, Silent Hill ticks every box for being a perfect game of its generation.
I have to agree, Silent Hill was such an absolute experience when it came out first on the PlayStation 1. I remember it absolutely shit me up when I was a teenager. Probably shouldn't have been playing it in a dark room, but that's a different story for a different day. The gameplay was very unique, where you didn't really have a lot of weaponry to be able to defend yourself or anything. It was mostly exploring around trying to find your lost daughter. The fog that is laid out all over Silent Hill is your worst enemy in that game, because horrible beasties and a whole assortment of nasty things can just jump out at any second and absolutely wreck your shizzle at the drop of a hat. The lack of defense that you have during the game is absolutely terrifying. The claustrophobia you get when you get into some of the buildings is absolutely terrifying. Even when you're out in the open, there is still this claustrophobic feel because the fog is surrounding all over you and everything like that. The soundtrack was great. The monster designs were absolutely brilliant. Silent Hill was the epitome of how games should go in relation to horror on Generation 5.
So there was my list. Were there any I missed? Which Generation 5 games do you love the most? Leave a comment below, and a huge thank you to Johnny for appearing in this episode.
Cheers for having me on again, DP. It's been an absolute pleasure as usual. If you're interested in seeing myself and the guys doing their thing during the week, we're over on YouTube on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Sundays, where we're going to be talking about loads of horror movies, horror games and all that kind of thing. And we also have the Gorecast TV show over on American Horror's Roku, Glue TV and Tubi TV every Sunday night, 8:30pm CST, whatever that equates to as GMTs, where you're going to be able to see us doing a whole bunch of horror sketches, horror short films, movie reviews and all of that kind of thing as well. And we're on all the usual platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening, and thanks for having me on again.
Remember, no list is definitive but the one you make yourself. This is Mike from Demented Pictures saying, may your movies be bloody and your scares be shitless.